Have you ever wished you could reach a point where racism no longer touched you? Not because it disappeared, not because people suddenly changed, but because it no longer reached the deepest part of you. Have you ever wondered how some people hear something racist and stay calm, not frozen, not numb, but untouched? As if the words hit the air around them but never found a place to land. You might believe they are stronger than you, colder, more disciplined. But what if that isn't strength at all? What if racism keeps hurting you not because of what others say, but because of what it activates inside you? Because here is the uncomfortable truth almost no one talks about. Racism does not hurt everyone equally. It hurts where there is already an open wound. And as long as you believe the pain comes from the outside, you will keep trying to protect yourself from the wrong place. If you are still listening, it's not by accident. This is for the person who is tired of carrying anger, tired of explaining their humanity, tired of feeling like other people's ignorance has power over their nervous system. Because what if the goal was never to become tougher, but to become unreachable? And what if the way there is the opposite of what you've been taught? Have you ever wondered why some people can hear something racist and stay calm, not because they didn't feel it, but because they refuse to let it reach the deepest part of them? Have you ever watched a child become mature overnight? Not because they grew, but because they learned what it costs to be seen. Because racism rarely begins with a slur. It begins with atmosphere, a shift in tone, a laugh that doesn't include you, a teacher who hears confidence as attitude, a stranger who watches you too closely in a store, and the child doesn't call it racism yet. They call it something off, but let something happen a few times, and the body begins to learn. They start speaking a little softer. They start smiling a little more. They start calculating before they express. They learn how to be safe in other people's eyes. And this is the moment the identity starts to split. One self is real, spontaneous, unedited. The other self is strategic, polite, careful, built to survive. And here is the detail most people miss. The child doesn't choose this consciously. They adapt the way lungs adapt to smoke, quietly, automatically, until the air itself feels normal. So when people say, "You're so strong," what they are often praising is a child who learned too early that being fully human comes with consequences. And once the child learns that lesson, the world doesn't even have to keep teaching it, because now the child teaches it to themselves, and the disappearance begins, not physical, psychological. And if you've ever felt this, the next question is inevitable. What exactly forms inside you when you grow up inside a threat you can't name? You might think what hurts is the racism itself, the comment, the look, the assumption, but the truth is more brutal. What hurts most is what it creates inside you. Psychology has names for this, and they matter because names reveal patterns. One of them is hypervigilance, not overthinking, not being sensitive. Hypervigilance is the nervous system living like something bad could happen at any moment, because something did. Another name is anticipatory self-regulation, the habit of editing yourself before anyone else has the chance to punish you for being real. And then there's a wound that rarely gets spoken out loud. Internalized surveillance. That feeling that you're being watched even when no one is staring. That you must be good before you're allowed to be safe. That one wrong expression could turn into a stereotype. You learn to perform calm. You learn to swallow anger. You learn to turn pain into humor. You learn to shrink the parts of you that might be too much. And people call it composure. But composure, when it's forced, isn't peace. It's a prison with a smile on it. And this is why the title matters. Because racism will never hurt you again isn't about the world becoming kinder. It's about understanding the echo inside you that racism keeps hitting. Because as long as racism finds that echo, it keeps power. So the real question becomes, where did the echo come from? This is where it stops being an experience and becomes a system. Have you ever noticed how some people don't relax even in safe rooms? How they still measure themselves, still scan, still monitor? That isn't personality. That's conditioning. Because when racism happens early, it doesn't just offend you, it trains you. It trains the body to prepare. It trains the mind to anticipate. It trains the heart to stay guarded. So you become excellent at reading rooms, excellent at noticing tone shifts, excellent at adjusting fast. And here's the tragedy. The better you get at it, the less anyone notices you're doing it. You can walk into a space and instantly calculate. How loud can you be? How honest can you be? How much of yourself is allowed here? And you don't call it fear. You call it being smart. But the nervous system doesn't care what you call it. It still carries the load. This is where the wound starts shaping identity. You start to believe your restraint is who you are. You start to believe your silence is maturity. You start to believe your carefulness is wisdom. But the truth is darker. That carefulness was built because the world didn't hold you gently. And when you grow up like that, something else happens too. You begin to feel responsible for how others perceive you. So you over-explain, you over-perform, you overachieve. You become unproblematic. You become easy to digest. And yes, people like you more, but you start to disappear from your own life. Because when you are always managing perception, you are rarely present. And one day you feel it, a strange emptiness. Not because you don't have goals, not because you don't have love, but because you don't feel fully inhabited. Because so much of your energy has been spent being acceptable. And that's when the question becomes unavoidable. If racism taught you to survive by shrinking, what happens when you stop shrinking? People think the hardest part is the hatred, but the hardest part is the grief you never got to name. The grief of being a child and realizing the world had rules for you that it didn't have for others. The grief of learning that innocence wasn't equally protected. The grief of watching adults tell you to be careful like caution was your birthright. And here's the part that hurts quietly. You weren't just hurt by what happened. You were hurt by what never happened. No one stopping it. No one explaining it. No one saying, that was wrong. So you learn to swallow things you should have been allowed to spit out. And that creates a particular kind of pain. Pain without witness. You grow up functioning. You laugh. You achieve. You look fine. But something inside you keeps a record. Who dismissed you? Who underestimated you? Who assumed the worst? And sometimes the grief turns into something else. Resentment behind politeness, exhaustion behind kindness, a quiet anger that doesn't scream. It simmers. But you don't let it out because you learned what happens when it does. So you call it being chill. You call it not giving them the satisfaction. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's also self-abandonment. Because when you never let yourself feel fully, you don't just avoid pain. You dull joy too, and that's the twist most people don't see. Racism doesn't only try to hurt you directly, it tries to make you abandon yourself preemptively. So the real question becomes, why does the body hold on even when the mind is tired of carrying it? Here is what psychology understands that most people ignore. The nervous system doesn't respond to politics, it responds to threat. And racism, especially repeated racism, functions like threat conditioning, not always loud, often subtle, but consistent enough to teach the body, stay ready. That's why certain moments feel bigger than they should, because they aren't isolated, they are connected. The brain stores patterns, the body stores sensations. So a small comment can activate an old file, a familiar feeling, a familiar danger. Psychologists call this triggering, not as a trend word, but as a biological reality. And there's another layer, learned self-monitoring. When you've been punished for expression, you start monitoring expression. When you've been misread, you start controlling what can be misread. Over time, that monitoring becomes automatic. And here's the most important piece. If racism keeps hurting you, it's not because you're weak. It's because your nervous system is doing what it was trained to do: protect you. But protection becomes a problem when it never turns off. That's when the old survival system becomes your present identity. And that is why not caring anymore doesn't start as confidence. It starts as a shift in awareness. Maybe I've been living like I still need their permission to exist safely. And once you think that thought, you can't unthink it. By adulthood, the wound has a rhythm. You can be successful and still feel unsafe. You can be loved and still brace for misunderstanding. You can be praised and still feel invisible. Because the patterns aren't logical. They're embodied. You might become hyper-independent because depending on others once felt risky. You might become overly agreeable because conflict felt dangerous. You might become emotionally controlled because losing control was punished. And sometimes, you become the perfect version of yourself. The one who never gives anyone a reason. The one who is always composed. The one who is always above it. But inside, there's a quiet fatigue. The fatigue of always having to be better to be treated as equal. And the more you do it, the more you realize a painful truth. You can't outperform prejudice. You can't over-explain hatred into empathy. You can't earn basic humanity. So some people reach a breaking point, not an explosion. A withdrawal. A quiet decision. I will not spend my life auditioning for people who are never going to see me clearly. And the moment that decision is made, everything begins to change. But the next part is where it gets dangerous. Because letting go of caring doesn't only detach you from them, it reveals what you were still hoping for. The turning point is not loud. It's a moment you notice something in yourself. You are tired of explaining. Tired of shaping your life around other people's misunderstanding. Tired of shrinking to avoid their reactions. Tired of giving racist people emotional importance. And then the recognition arrives. I have been treating their perception like reality. That is the cage. Not the world's ignorance, but the way you've been forced to orbit it. You start to see how much energy you've spent anticipating disrespect, preparing responses, rehearsing dignity, holding yourself tight, and suddenly, a quiet truth becomes undeniable. If you stop caring about racist people, you don't lose your power. You recover it. Because the power was never in their words. It was in your nervous system's belief that their words mattered. This is not healing yet. This is recognition. And recognition changes the direction of the whole story. Because now the question isn't, how do I survive them? It becomes, who am I when I stop organizing my life around their gaze? You weren't weak. You were adapting. You weren't too affected. You were aware. You weren't failing at toughness. You were carrying something that was never meant for a child to carry. This is the reframe that softens the shame. Because shame says, why did I let it get to me? Compassion says, of course it got to you. You were human in a system that tried to reduce you. And when you understand that, something changes inside. You stop blaming yourself for having a nervous system. You stop judging your sensitivity as if it's a defect. You start seeing your reactions for what they were: signals, evidence, proof that your body noticed what your environment refused to name. And the reframe doesn't say, be stronger. It says something quieter. You have been strong enough. Now you deserve to be free enough. But freedom begins in a strange place, not in becoming hard, but in no longer begging to be handled gently by people who refuse to learn. And the next shift is the most subtle one. When you stop caring, you don't become numb. You become selective. This is not the kind of healing that looks like triumph. It looks like quiet detachment. Not indifference, not denial, detachment. A nervous system slowly realizing their gaze is not my home. It starts with small internal movements. You notice you don't flinch as long. You notice you don't rehearse your humanity before entering spaces. You notice you don't feel the need to prove your worth to strangers. And the most important part, you stop giving racist people the most sacred resource you have, your attention. Because attention is energy, and energy is life. So the body begins to loosen, not because racism disappears, but because your nervous system stops treating racism like a verdict. It becomes background noise, unpleasant, real, but no longer central. And slowly, something returns. Presence. You begin to live again. Not as a response to them, but as a return to yourself. And that's when you realize the title was never a fantasy. Racism will never hurt you again doesn't mean nothing racist will ever happen. It means it no longer gets to own the deepest part of you. And that brings us to the final truth. Racism tries to do one thing better than anything else. It tries to make you believe you belong to their perception. But you don't. You never did. And the day you stop caring about racist people, not because you are numb, but because you are awake, something fundamental shifts. Their words still exist. Their ignorance still exists. But it no longer finds the same open wound. Because you stop offering it one. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding. You stop shrinking to make their comfort possible. You stop treating their gaze like gravity. And what replaces that gravity is quiet, not emptiness, space. A space where you can be whole without permission. And maybe that is the most radical transformation of all. Not fighting them every day. Not convincing them. Not proving anything. Just living. Free enough that their hatred becomes small. Not because you became harder, but because you became more yours. And when you become more yours, the world can still try to touch you, but it no longer knows where to hit.